All right, let's dive into a topic that's, well, pretty complex and often really misunderstood. So, let's start with the big question. What really drives female desire? Well, according to the sources we're looking at today, the answer isn't some simple switch that just gets flipped on. Nope. It's much more of a process, kind of like a journey that unfolds only when the conditions are just right. And this right here, this is the core idea. The source material suggests that for a lot of men, the path is pretty direct. It starts with desire, which then leads to physical arousal. But for women, the proposed sequence is different. It starts with a feeling of safety. Only then can arousal happen, and only after that does it all come together as conscious desire. It's a completely different order of operations. So to really get this, we're going to walk through it step by step. We'll start with that crucial foundation of safety, then move to the spark of arousal, see how that ignites the flame of desire, and then we'll wrap it all up with the big takeaway. Okay, let's dig into that first all-important step, the need for safety. The thinking here is that without a basic feeling of security and comfort, none of the other stages can even begin. Seriously, making someone feel unsafe is probably the fastest way to just shut down any possibility of attraction right from the start. So, what specifically makes a woman feel unsafe? Researchers have actually dug into this. Here are the top 3 behaviors that were ranked as the most creepy. Number 1, staring at someone before you even talk to them. 2, touching way too frequently or too soon. And 3, constantly trying to steer the conversation towards sex. These things are basically an instant off switch. This is a pretty cool way to visualize it using 2 late-night hosts. You see Conan O'Brien's body language here, leaning in, hands pressed tight. It can come across as really intense, almost judgmental. But then you have Craig Ferguson, who would often lean back. He created space. His posture was open, relaxed, which totally changes the vibe and helps his guests feel more comfortable and safe. And here's the really clever part about Ferguson's approach to humor, especially around sexual topics. He almost never brought them up himself, out of the blue. Instead, he'd wait for his guest to say something with a potential double meaning, and then he'd jump in with a quick, witty comment. It was reactive, not predatory, which let him be funny without being creepy. Okay, so let's say that foundation of safety is there. Now what? Well, the source suggests a woman then enters a more neutral state, where she's actually receptive to the next stage, arousal. And this is where the senses really start to come into play. You've probably heard of the female gaze, right? Well, a perfect example is the show The Summer I Turned Pretty. It got a ton of praise for this. It's not just about what you're seeing, but how you're seeing it. It's all about focusing on those little details that build romantic tension and physical attraction. And it's really no surprise that shows like this tend to focus on specific body parts. There was a study where women were asked to rate the most erotic parts of a man's body, and you know what? It wasn't always the obvious ones. The top answers were eyes, the back, arms, and even hands. It's all about suggesting things like strength, capability, and tenderness. So how does this work in real life, especially with something like touch? Well, the key concept here is something called plausible deniability. Think about it. It's the difference between just grabbing someone's waist out of nowhere versus gently placing a hand on their waist to guide them through a packed room. The physical touch is the same, but the context makes one feel invasive and the other feel, well, gentlemanly. And it's not just about touch. Our eyes, man, they are incredibly powerful. A recent study in 2024 found that for every single minute of mutual, sustained eye contact, attraction between 2 people went up by a whopping 35%. That is a huge deal for something so simple. Of course, you don't want to just stare at someone like a psycho. That's way too intense. So here's a simple little technique to make eye contact feel more connected and less like an interrogation. It's called the triangle method. You just glance from one of their eyes to their other eye, then briefly down to their lips, and then back up to the first eye. It creates a much more dynamic and honestly charismatic gaze. So, you've built a sense of safety, and you sparked arousal. The final piece of this puzzle is the leap into actual conscious desire. This is where it all moves into the mind. It's a psychological shift where the brain makes a decision. I want this person. One of the psychological engines that can really drive this is something called cognitive dissonance attraction. See, our brains just hate being uncertain. So if someone's intentions are kind of unclear, are they into me, are they not, and you find yourself spending a ton of mental energy trying to figure them out, your brain needs to justify that effort. And one way it does that is by concluding, well, if I'm thinking about them this much, I must really like them. And history actually gives us this wild example of this principle in action. A guy named the Duke of Lausanne. He apparently wasn't your classic handsome dude, but he became one of the most legendary seducers in French history. And his secret? He totally mastered the art of using his absence, not just his presence, to make himself irresistible. So what did he do? His method was, well, it was simple, but apparently devastatingly effective. When he was with women, he'd be incredibly romantic, super charming, and then the next time he saw them, he'd be totally cold and distant. This constant push and pull created this massive cloud of uncertainty. And the results? Straight up obsession. The most powerful women in the country spent all their time trying to figure him out. They were just consumed with thoughts of him, and because of cognitive dissonance, all that thinking turned into intense desire. It drove the king's own cousin so crazy that she proposed to him. That actually got him thrown in prison for 10 years. But hey, in the end, he got out, married her, and secured his fortune. Crazy story, right? Okay, so let's zoom back out and put all these pieces together. What's the big picture here? The main thing to remember is that female desire, at least as presented in this model, isn't just one thing. It's a process. It's a sequence that has to happen in the right order. It all starts with that non-negotiable foundation of safety, which then allows for sensory arousal, and that finally blossoms into psychological desire. Each step literally unlocks the next. And that kind of leaves us with a final question to think about. In our modern dating world with apps and all the other complexities, which of these three stages, safety, arousal, or desire, do you think has become the most difficult one to actually get right?